Lila Dawson walked into the small community karaoke dojo, her steps quiet and unassuming. She didn't stand out in any way. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and she wore plain workout clothes, an old gray t-shirt and faded, black sweatpants. Her sneakers were scuffed from years of use, and her hands clutched a water bottle tightly as if it gave her some kind of comfort. To anyone watching, she looked like just another beginner, someone who had wandered into the dojo hoping to learn self-defense or maybe just get in shape. But what no one knew, not even the instructors, was that Lila wasn't there to learn. She already knew how to fight. For years, Lila had trained in secret. She traveled across the country whenever she could, learning from some of the best martial artists most people had never heard of. These teachers weren't famous. They didn't appear on TV or compete in flashy tournaments. They were disciplined, traditional, and dedicated to their craft. Under their guidance, Lila became more than just good. She became exceptional. But she never sought recognition or glory. For her, fighting was personal. It was about control, focus, and protecting herself when necessary. She didn't need belts or trophies to prove anything. The dojo was small but lively. Mats covered the floor, and posters of famous martial artists hung on the walls. Students stretched and practiced kicks while others talked and laughed. Though, energy in the room was high, almost electric. At the center of it all stood Jake Miller, a tall man with broad shoulders and a cocky grin. He was the star of the dojo, the one everyone looked up to or at least pretended to respect. With his black belt tied neatly around his waist, he strutted around like he owned the place. And in many ways, he did. Jake loved being the center of attention. He thrived on it, feeding off the admiration of his peers and the fear of newcomers. When he noticed Lila standing by the door, shifting uncomfortably as she scanned the room, his lips curled into a smirk. "Well, well," he said, loudly, his voice carrying over the chatter. "Looks like we've got fresh meat today." His friends laughed, their eyes darting toward Lila. A few curious students turned to see who Jake was talking about, and soon enough, all eyes were on her. Lila ignored them. She kept her gaze low, focusing on tying her belt. Her fingers moved, methodically pulling the fabric tight and making sure the knot was secure. Inside, though, she felt a flicker of annoyance. She hadn't come here for drama. All she wanted was a place to practice, somewhere she could refine her skills without drawing attention to herself. But Jake's words lingered in the air, heavy and mocking. "Hey, new girl," Jake called out, taking a few steps closer. "What's your name?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Lila," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight of so many stares. "Lila," Jake repeated, rolling the name around in his mouth as if testing its flavor. "Nice to meet you, Lila. I'm Jake. You ever done karate before?" She shook her head. "Not really." His grin widened. "Not really? That's cool. We'll take care of you. Don't worry, you're in good hands." He flexed his arms dramatically, earning more laughter from his group. Lila forced a polite smile, though her jaw tightened slightly. She could already tell this wasn't going to be easy. As the class began, Jake made it clear he wasn't going to leave her alone. During warm-ups, he positioned himself right next to her, offering unsolicited advice. "You sure you're even flexible enough for this?" he teased, bending down into a stretch that showcased his muscles. His friends snickered, their eyes glued to Lila, waiting to see how she'd react. But Lila didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she mirrored his movements perfectly, her form clean and precise. If Jake noticed, he didn't say anything. He just kept talking, his tone dripping with condescension. "You know, karate takes a lot of strength. Maybe you should start with something easier, like yoga or Pilates." Lila nodded politely. "Thanks for the tip." Her calm response only seemed to irritate him further. By the time sparring drills rolled around, Jake had decided he'd had enough of her quiet defiance. He raised his hand eagerly when the instructor asked for volunteers to pair up with beginners. "I'll take her," he announced, pointing at Lila. His friends cheered, clearly expecting a quick and entertaining match. Even the instructor seemed hesitant but ultimately agreed, thinking it would be a good learning experience for both of them. Jake bounced on the balls of his feet as they stepped onto the mat, his confidence radiating off him. "Don't worry," he said with a wink. "I'll go easy on you." The crowd chuckled and Lila gave him a small nod, her expression unreadable. When the instructor signaled the start of the match, Jake lunged forward immediately, aiming for a punch to her shoulder. But instead of flinching or backing away, Lila sidestepped him effortlessly, her movements smooth and controlled. Surprised, Jake tried again, throwing punch after punch, each one faster and harder than the last, yet every single strike missed. Lila dodged and blocked with ease, her body moving like water. The laughter in the room died down as people realized something unusual was happening. Jake's attacks grew increasingly aggressive, his frustration mounting. Finally, he threw a powerful roundhouse kick aimed directly at her ribs. Everyone held their breath, expecting Lila to stumble or fall, but instead she caught his leg midair with one hand, stopping him cold. For a moment, the entire dojo went silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Then, slowly, Lila lowered his foot back to the ground and stepped back, bowing slightly to signal the end of the match. Jake stared at her, his face red with embarrassment and anger. He muttered something under his breath before storming off the mat, leaving Lila standing alone in the spotlight. The other students whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. Some were impressed, marveling at her speed and precision. Others dismissed it as luck, convinced that Jake must have been holding back. But Lila didn't stick around to hear their opinions. She quietly returned to her spot on the sidelines, her expression unchanged, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Later, as the class wrapped up and people filed out of the dojo, Jake lingered near the exit, his arms crossed and his jaw clenched. He watched Lila pack up her things, his mind racing. Who was she, really? How had she managed to embarrass him like that? One thing was certain. He wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not in his dojo. The next few days passed quietly for Lila, but the tension in the dojo was palpable. Word of her performance during the sparring match spread quickly among the students. Some were curious, others skeptical, and a handful seemed genuinely impressed. But Jake Miller couldn't let it go. Losing face in front of his peers gnawed at him, eating away at his confidence and pride. He had built his reputation on being the strongest, the fastest, the best. And now this quiet, unassuming woman had walked into his dojo and made him look foolish. Jake wasn't used to failure. In fact, he avoided it at all costs. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of invincibility, using intimidation and arrogance to keep others in line. If someone challenged him, he crushed them. If someone doubted him, he proved them wrong. But Lila was different. She hadn't tried to show off or humiliate him. She had simply defended herself with calm efficiency. That made it worse. It wasn't just about losing. It was about how she had done it. Her quiet composure unsettled him, like she didn't care one way or the other about his opinion, and that infuriated him. By the time the next class rolled around, Jake had decided to take matters into his own hands. He arrived early, pacing near the entrance as students trickled in. When Lila walked through the door, he immediately zeroed in on her. "Hey," he said, his tone sharp and clipped. "We need to talk." Lila paused, glancing at him briefly before continuing toward the locker room. "About what?" she asked, her voice neutral. Jake followed her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. What happened last week. You think you're better than everyone here, don't you?" Lily stopped and turned, to face him, her expression calm but firm. "I don't think that. I came here to train, not to compete." "Yeah, well, maybe you should reconsider sticking around." Jake leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "Accidents happen, you know." For a moment, Lila just looked at him, her dark eyes steady. Then she nodded slightly, as if acknowledging his threat, and walked away without another word. Jake stood there fuming, his fists clenched at his sides. He hated how unruffled she seemed, how she refused to play his game. Most people would have backed down by now, apologized, or at least shown some fear. But Lila? She acted like he was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. As the days went on, Jake's frustration grew. He started finding excuses to bump into Lila during class, making sarcastic comments about her technique or questioning her presence in the dojo. At first, she ignored him, focusing instead on her training. But Jake wasn't the type to give up easily. He began pushing harder, testing her limits in subtle ways. During partner drills, he assigned himself as her partner whenever possible, using every opportunity to throw increasingly aggressive moves. The other students noticed, exchanging uneasy glances, but no one dared to intervene. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Jake cornered Lila again. This time, they were alone in the locker room, the echoes of departing footsteps fading down the hallway. "Listen," he said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just waltz in here and act like you're untouchable. People are starting to talk." Lila finished packing her bag before responding. "What do you want me to say, Jake? I'm not trying to cause problems." "Then why are you still here?" he shot back. "You clearly don't need this place, so why stick around?" She met his gaze steadily, her voice calm but firm. "Because I enjoy it. Because I want to train." "Is that such a crime?" Jake scowled, his patience wearing thin. "You might think you're hot stuff, but don't get too comfortable. This is my dojo, and I won't tolerate anyone showing me up." Lila sighed softly, shaking her head. "I'm not here to compete with you. I'm here for myself." "Well, maybe you should reconsider," Jake snapped, stepping closer. "Because if you keep this up, things are going to get ugly." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken tension. Finally, Lila broke it. "Is that supposed to scare me?" Her question caught Jake off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. For the first time, he felt a flicker of doubt. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, that made him hesitate. She wasn't afraid of him, not even a little. Instead of answering, Jake turned and stormed out of the locker room, slamming the door behind him. Lila watched him go, her expression unreadable. She knew he wouldn't let it drop. Men like Jake always needed to prove themselves, to assert their dominance no matter the cost. And while she had no desire to escalate the situation, she also knew better than to underestimate him. If he pushed her far enough, she wouldn't hesitate to push back. Over the next week, Jake's behavior became even more erratic. He sabotaged Lila's equipment, loosening the straps on her gloves and tampering with her water bottle. He whispered insults under his breath whenever she passed by, hoping to provoke a reaction. But Lila remained unfazed, treating his antics with the same indifference she had shown from the start. Her lack of response only fueled his anger further. Finally, during a particularly grueling sparring session, Jake snapped. After yet another humiliating defeat, this time witnessed by nearly the entire dojo, he approached Lila with fire in his eyes. "That's it," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "I've had enough of your games. We're settling this once and for all." Lila raised an eyebrow, her expression calm but wary. "Settling what?" "You know exactly what I mean." Jake spat. "A real fight. No rules, no instructors, just you and me. Let's see how tough you really are." The challenge hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Lila hesitated, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to refuse, to walk away and avoid unnecessary conflict. But another part of her, the part that had spent years honing her skills in secret, knew that sometimes confrontation was inevitable. If she backed down now, Jake would never stop. He would see it as a victory, a sign that his bullying worked, and she couldn't let that happen. "Fine," she said finally, her voice steady. "But not here. Not in front of everyone." Jake smirked, triumphant. "Tonight, after class, be ready." That evening, the dojo was eerily quiet. The mats lay empty, bathed in the soft glow of overhead lights. Lila arrived first, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She set her bag down near the edge of the mat and began stretching, her focus sharp and unwavering. A few minutes later, Jake appeared, his usual swagger replaced by a tense, predatory, Energy. He moved to the center of the mat, cracking his knuckles as he stared her down. "Ready?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Lila nodded, rising to her feet. "Let's do this." Without warning, Jake lunged forward, throwing a flurry of punches aimed at her face. But Lila was ready. She sidestepped each strike with practiced ease, her movements fluid and precise. Frustrated, Jake switched tactics, aiming a powerful kick at her midsection. Lila blocked it effortlessly, countering with a swift strike to his ribs that sent him stumbling backward. The fight continued like this, Jake attacking recklessly while Lila countered with calculated precision. Each blow he landed was met with a counterattack that left him reeling. Within minutes, sweat poured down Jake's face, his breathing ragged and uneven. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by desperation and disbelief. How was she doing this? How was she still standing? Finally, with one decisive move, Lila swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the mat. Before he could recover, she pinned him down, her forearm pressed lightly against his throat, not hard enough to hurt, but firmly enough to make her point. "It's over," she said quietly, her voice calm but resolute. Jake struggled for a moment, then went still, his chest heaving as he stared up at her. For the first time, there was no trace of arrogance in his eyes, only shock and shame. Slowly, Lila released him and stepped back, offering a hand to help him up. "I didn't come here to hurt you," she said softly. "I came to train. Maybe now you'll understand that respect isn't given, it's earned." Jake hesitated, then took her hand, allowing her to pull him to his feet. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face said it all. For the first time in a long time, he realized he had been wrong. The days that followed the private fight between Lila and Jake were tense, but quieter than anyone expected. Word of what happened spread quickly through the dojo, though no one dared to talk about it openly. The students whispered in hushed tones. When they thought Lila wasn't listening, their curiosity mixed with awe and a little fear. Some admired her skill and composure, while others wondered if she had gone too far by challenging Jake directly. But no matter what people thought, one thing was clear. Things had changed. For Jake, the aftermath was humbling. He didn't storm around the dojo like he used to or make sarcastic comments during class. Instead, he kept to himself, his usual cocky grin replaced by a thoughtful frown. When he sparred with other students, he seemed more focused, less aggressive. It was as if the fight with Lila had forced him to rethink not just his approach to martial arts, but also how he treated others. He still watched Lila from across the room, his gaze lingering longer than necessary, but there was none of the hostility that had defined their earlier encounters. Lila, on the other hand, carried on as if nothing had happened. She arrived at the dojo on time, practiced diligently, and left without drawing attention to herself. If anything, she appeared even calmer than before, her presence steady and unshakable. She didn't seek recognition for what she had done, nor did she expect apologies or praise. To her, the fight had been necessary, not because she wanted to prove herself, but because it had been the only way to put an end to Jake's bullying once and for all. Still, the tension lingered. Even though Jake had backed off, the atmosphere in the dojo felt different. The other students were more cautious, unsure of how to act around either of them. Some tried to bridge the gap, offering hesitant smiles or polite nods when they passed Lila in the hallway. Others avoided her altogether, intimidated by her quiet confidence in the stories they'd heard about her skills. One evening, after a particularly long training session, Lila stayed behind to clean up. She enjoyed these quiet moments alone, in the dojo, when the noise of the day faded away and she could focus on her thoughts. As she wiped down the mats, she noticed someone standing in the doorway. It was Mia Harper, one of the younger students in the class. Mia was small for her age, with curly brown hair and a shy smile that rarely reached her eyes. She often sat quietly in the corner during lessons, watching the others practice, but rarely participating herself. "Hey," Mia said softly, stepping inside. Can I talk to you?" Lila set the cleaning rag aside and nodded. Of course, what's on your mind?" Mia hesitated, twisting the hem of her shirt nervously. I wanted to say thank you for what you did with Jake. Lila tilted her head slightly, surprised. You don't have to thank me. I didn't do it for anyone else. I know, Mia said quickly. But it still helped. He used to pick on me too, you know. Not as much as he did with you, but enough. I always felt like I couldn't stand up to him. Like I wasn't strong enough. Lila studied her for a moment, her expression softening. Strength isn't about size or power. It's about knowing who you are and standing your ground. You don't need to fight to be strong. Mia looked down at her feet, chewing her lip. That's easy for you to say. You're amazing. Everyone says so. Lila shook her head. I'm not amazing. I've just trained hard and learned to trust myself. That's something anyone can do, including you. Mia glanced up, her eyes wide with surprise. Do you really think so? I know so, Lila replied firmly. If you want, I can help you. Show you some basics. Nothing fancy, just enough to build your confidence. A slow smile spread across Mia's face, lighting up her features for the first time. I'd like that, thank you. From that day forward, Lila began spending extra time with Mia after class. They worked on simple techniques, how to block punches, how to find balance, how to move with purpose rather than panic. At first, Mia struggled, her movements clumsy and uncertain. But Lila was patient, encouraging her every step of the way. Over time, Mia grew bolder, her posture straighter, her strikes sharper. She started participating more in class, raising her hand to volunteer for drills and even laughing with the other students. The change in her was subtle but undeniable. Meanwhile, Jake continued to keep his distance from Lila, though his behavior toward the rest of the class shifted noticeably. He stopped teasing the newer students and began offering tips instead of criticism. During sparring sessions, he encouraged his partners rather than mocking their mistakes. It wasn't perfect. He still slipped into old habits occasionally, but the effort was there, and slowly, the other students began to notice. One afternoon, after a particularly intense round of sparring, Jake approached Lila as she packed up her gear. Got a minute? He asked, his tone cautious. Lila paused, glancing at him briefly before nodding. Sure. Jake hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Look, I just wanted to say thanks. For the other night. For showing me how much I didn't know. Lila raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. You're welcome. I mean it, Jake continued, his voice earnest now. I was wrong about you, about a lot of things. I thought being the best meant proving everyone else was weaker. But that's not strength. It's insecurity, and I see that now. Lila nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, don't lose that. Jake managed a small smile, though it faltered under her steady gaze. I won't. Promise. As he walked away, Lila watched him go, her expression unreadable. She hadn't expected an apology, let alone gratitude. But she recognized sincerity when she saw it. And Jake's words carried weight. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand what true strength really meant. Over the following weeks, the dojo transformed, in subtle ways. The energy in the room became lighter, more collaborative. Students cheered each other on during drills, offering high fives and words of encouragement. Even the instructor seemed pleased, commenting on the improved camaraderie and dedication among the group. Lila remained a quiet presence in the background, content to fade into the shadows while others took center stage. But her impact was undeniable. Mia, in particular, blossomed under Lila's guidance. She no longer shrank into the corners of the room, afraid to speak up. Instead, she stood tall, her confidence growing with each passing day. One evening, after a successful sparring match, she turned to Lila with a grin. I did it. Did you see that? I actually blocked his kick. Lila smiled, genuinely proud. I saw. Great job. I couldn't have done it without you, Mia said, her voice filled with gratitude. You've taught me so much. You did the work, Lila replied simply. I just pointed you in the right direction. As Mia ran off to celebrate with her friends, Lila stood back watching the scene unfold. The dojo was no longer just a place for her to train. It had become a community, a space where people supported and challenged each other to grow. And, though she hadn't come here looking for connection, she found it anyway, in the most unexpected ways. In the end, Lila realized that strength wasn't just about protecting yourself or proving a point. It was about lifting others up, helping them find their own power. And in doing so, she discovered a deeper sense of purpose, one that went beyond belts, trophies, or titles. As the weeks went by, the changes in the dojo became more noticeable. The once tense atmosphere had softened, replaced by a sense of unity and mutual respect. Students who had previously avoided each other now paired up willingly during drills, laughing and encouraging one another. Even Jake, who had once ruled the dojo with arrogance, seemed to have found a new purpose. He no longer dominated conversations or belittled others. Instead, he focused on improving himself and helping those around him. Lila continued to blend into the background, her presence steady but unassuming. She didn't seek recognition for the role she'd played in transforming the dojo, nor did she expect it. To her, the real victory wasn't in proving herself, it was in seeing how far everyone else had come. But even though she preferred to stay out of the spotlight, there were moments when her influence couldn't be ignored. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, the instructor called everyone together for an announcement. "We've been invited to participate in a local martial arts exhibition next month," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "It's a chance for us to showcase what we've learned and represent our dojo. I'll need volunteers to demonstrate techniques and sparring matches." The room buzzed with anticipation as students exchanged eager glances. For many, this was an opportunity to test their skills in front of an audience and gain valuable experience. Hands shot up immediately, including Mia's, who practically bounced on her toes in excitement. Lila, however, stayed seated, her expression calm but disinterested. "Lila," the instructor said, turning to her, "you should join us. Your skills would be a great addition to the team." She shook her head politely. "I don't think so. I'm not here for exhibitions. But you could inspire others," he pressed gently. "People look up to you." "I'm just here to train," Lila replied simply, leaving no room for argument. The instructor sighed but nodded, respecting her decision. Still, he couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. Having someone like Lila on the team would have been a huge asset, not just because of her skill, but because of the quiet confidence she brought to everything she did. Despite Lila's refusal to participate, the rest of the dojo threw themselves into preparing for the exhibition. Practices grew longer and more intense as students worked tirelessly to perfect their routines. Jake took charge of organizing the sparring demonstrations, pairing people up, and offering constructive feedback. His newfound humility earned him the trust of his peers, and they listened intently whenever he spoke. Mia, meanwhile, threw herself into her preparations with unmatched enthusiasm. She practiced late into the evenings, often staying behind after class to refine her moves. Lila occasionally joined her, offering guidance and encouragement without ever pushing too hard. "Remember," Lila told her one night as they worked, on blocking techniques. "It's not about being perfect, it's about showing what you've learned and having fun while doing it." Mia nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "I won't let you down." "You're not letting anyone down," Lila replied firmly. "This is your moment, own it." The day of the exhibition finally arrived, and the dojo buzzed with nervous energy. Students dressed in crisp uniforms, their belts tied neatly around their waists. Parents, friends, and curious spectators filled the bleachers, chatting excitedly, as they waited for the event to begin. Backstage, the participants huddled together, going over last-minute details and offering words of encouragement. Jake stood at the center of the group, his usual bravado replaced by genuine leadership. "We've got this," he said, his voice steady. "Just focus on what we've practiced and remember why we're here, to show everyone what we're capable of." Everyone nodded, their nerves giving way to determination. As the first demonstration began, the crowd erupted into applause, cheering loudly for every punch, kick, and flip. Each performance was met with thunderous approval, and soon enough it was time for the sparring matches. Mia stepped onto the mat alongside her partner, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced toward the sidelines, where Lila stood watching, quietly. Catching her eye, Lila gave her a small nod, a silent gesture of support that meant more to Mia than any words could. When the match began, Mia moved with surprising confidence. Her blocks were solid, her strikes precise. Though her opponent was taller and stronger, she held her ground, using the techniques Lila had taught her to counter every attack. The crowd roared with approval, their cheers fueling her determination. By the end of the match, Mia was breathing heavily but smiling ear to ear. She had done it. She had shown everyone, including herself, just how far she had come. After the exhibition ended, the dojo celebrated with pizza and laughter, the air filled with a sense of accomplishment. Everyone congratulated each other, sharing stories from the day and marveling at how much they had achieved together. Jake approached Lila, holding out a slice of pepperoni pizza. "Here," he said with a grin. "You deserve this." Lila accepted it with a small smile. "Thanks. You know," Jake continued, leaning against the wall beside her, "you might not have fought today, but you were still part of it. Everyone knows how much you've helped us. All of us." Lila shrugged modestly. "I didn't do anything special. You all worked hard. That's what matters." "That's where you're wrong," Jake said, his tone serious for once. "You showed us what it means to be strong, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. You taught us to respect each other, to push ourselves, and to lift each other up. That's something none of us will forget." Before Lila could respond, Mia ran over, her face glowing with happiness. "Did you see me? Did you see my match?" "I saw," Lila replied, her voice warm with pride. "You were amazing," Mia beamed, throwing her arms around Lila in a quick hug. "Thank you for everything." Lila patted her shoulder gently. "You did the work, Mia. I'm just glad I got to watch." Later that night, as the celebration wound down and the dojo emptied out, Lila lingered behind to clean up. She enjoyed these quiet moments, the hum of satisfaction lingering in the air. As she wiped down the mats, she reflected on everything that had happened since she first walked through the doors of the dojo. She hadn't come looking for connection or recognition, but somehow, she had found both, in the most unexpected ways. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she saw Jake standing in the doorway holding 2 bottles of water. "Thought you might need this," he said, tossing one to her. "Thanks," she said, catching it easily. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Finally, Jake spoke. "You know, I used to think strength was about winning fights, about proving I was better than everyone else, but now I realize it's about something else entirely." "What's that?" Lila asked, genuinely curious. "It's about knowing who you are and staying true to that, even when it's hard," Jake replied thoughtfully. "And maybe it's also about helping others find their own strength." Lila smiled faintly, nodding. "That's a good start." Jake chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Who would have thought I'd learn all this from someone who didn't even want to compete?" "They say the best teachers are the ones who lead by example," Lila said simply. "Well, consider me officially grateful," Jake said, his tone lighthearted but sincere. "For everything." Lila didn't respond, but her smile said enough. As Jake turned to leave, she watched him go, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. In the end, she realized, strength wasn't about dominance or control. It was about connection, about lifting others up and creating something greater than yourself. And in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and achievement, Lila knew she had found exactly what she had been searching for all along. The weeks following the exhibition passed quickly, and life at the dojo settled into a comfortable rhythm. The students continued to train with renewed energy, their confidence bolstered by the success of the event. Lila remained a quiet but steady presence, always ready to offer guidance when needed but never seeking attention for herself. To the others, she was both a mentor and a mystery, a woman who had transformed their dojo without ever asking for recognition. Mia, in particular, flourished under Lila's influence. She no longer hesitated during drills or shied away from challenges. Instead, she embraced every opportunity to grow, her movements becoming sharper and more precise with each passing day. Other students began to look up to her, inspired by her determination and progress. Even Jake, who had once been quick to dismiss newcomers, now treated Mia with genuine respect, often pairing up with her during sparring sessions to help refine her technique. But despite the positive changes, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that her time at the dojo was coming to an end. She hadn't planned to stay long, just long enough to practice and maybe clear her head. But somehow, the place had grown on her. It wasn't just the mats or the routines, it was the people. They had become something like family, even if none of them fully understood her. Still, Lila knew better than most that staying too long in one place could make you complacent. And complacency was something she couldn't afford. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lila sat alone in the dojo. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of wind through the open windows. She had stayed behind after class to clean up as usual, but tonight, she lingered longer than necessary. Her mind wandered, replaying memories of the past few months. The fights, the friendships, the small victories that had added up to something much bigger than she'd expected. She was startled out of her thoughts by the sound of footsteps. Turning, she saw Jake standing in the doorway, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Hey," he said, stepping inside. "I thought I'd find you here." "What is it?" Lila asked, her tone neutral but not unfriendly. Jake hesitated, glancing around the empty dojo before speaking. "I wanted to ask you something about why you came here in the first place." Lila raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. "I told you before. I came to train." "Yeah, but," Jake trailed off, searching for the right words. "It doesn't add up. Someone like you doesn't need this place. You could hold your own anywhere. So why here? Why us?" For a moment, Lila didn't answer. She stared at him, weighing whether to share even a piece of the truth. Finally, she sighed softly and looked away. Sometimes you need a fresh start. A place where no one knows your past or expects anything from you. I came here because I needed space to breathe, to figure things out. Jake nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "And did you? Figure things out, I mean." "I think so," Lila replied, her voice tinged with reflection. "This place helped me remember what matters. It's not about being the best or proving yourself. It's about connection, about finding strength together instead of apart." Jake smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Does that mean you're leaving?" Lila didn't answer immediately. She turned back to the mat, running her fingers over its smooth surface. "I can't stay forever. You know that." "I do," Jake admitted. "But I guess I hoped you would." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken emotions. Then Lila spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You don't need me anymore. None of you do. You've got each other now. That's enough." Jake opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, realizing she was right. Over the past few months, the dojo had become stronger, not because of Lila's presence, but because of the bonds they had built with one another. Still, the thought of her leaving left a hollow ache in his chest. The next morning, Lila packed her bag quietly, careful not to wake the others in the shared dormitory where she had been staying. She didn't leave a note or say goodbye. She rarely did. Goodbyes were messy, emotional, and often unnecessary. Instead, she slipped out of the building before sunrise, her footsteps silent against the pavement. When the students arrived for class later that day, they found the dojo eerily quiet. At first, they assumed Lila was running late, an unusual occurrence, but possible. But as the hours passed and she still hadn't appeared, reality began to sink in. Mia was the first to notice her absence, her face falling as she realized Lila's bag was missing from the locker room. "She's gone," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "She left," Jake, overhearing her, stepped closer. Are you sure? Mia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She wouldn't just leave without saying anything, would she? Jake sighed, placing a comforting hand on Mia's shoulder. That's just who she is. She doesn't do goodbyes. But why? Mia asked, her voice breaking. Why would she leave us? Because she knows we don't need her anymore, Jake replied gently. She gave us everything we needed to keep going. Now it's our turn to carry the torch. Though his words were meant to comfort, they did little to ease the sadness in the room. For days afterward, the students trained in silence, their movements heavy with the weight of Lila's departure. But slowly, they began to channel their grief into action. They pushed themselves harder, supported each other more fiercely, and honored Lila's memory by embodying the lessons she had taught them. Months later, the dojo thrived. New students joined, drawn by stories of the exhibition and the camaraderie that defined the group. Jake took on a leadership role, mentoring beginners and organizing community events. Mia became one of the top performers, her confidence shining brighter than ever. And though Lila's name was rarely spoken aloud, her influence lingered in every corner of the dojo, in the way students encouraged one another, in the respect they showed during sparring matches, and in the quiet strength they carried within themselves. One rainy afternoon, as Jake stood near the entrance of the dojo, he noticed a familiar figure walking down the street. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized her. Lila, her dark hair damp from the rain, her expression calm but curious. She paused outside the building, peering through the window as if unsure whether to enter. Without hesitation, Jake stepped outside, shielding her from the rain with his jacket. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief and joy. Lila shrugged slightly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Just passing through. Thought I'd see how things were going." Jake laughed softly, shaking his head. "Things are great. Better than ever. But you should come in. Everyone will want to see you." For a moment, Lila hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the dojo. Then, with a nod, she followed him inside. As the students caught sight of her, a wave of excitement rippled through the room. Cheers erupted, and soon enough Lila was surrounded by smiling faces, eager hands reaching out to greet her. "You're back," Mia exclaimed, throwing her arms around Lila in a tight hug. "We missed you so much." Lila returned the embrace, her smile genuine for the first time in months. "I missed you too." As the celebration unfolded, Jake watched from the sidelines, his heart full. He knew Lila wouldn't stay forever. She never did. But for now, she was here, and that was enough. Because in the end, it wasn't about how long she stayed. It was about the impact she had made and the legacy she had left behind. And in that moment, surrounded by the people she had helped shape, Lila realized something important. Home wasn't a place. It was the connections you formed, the lives you touched, and the strength you shared. And in that sense, she had finally found hers.